In 2007, a veterinarian who had spent his whole career on dogs and cats bought 140,000 acres of high desert in eastern Oregon and started filling a dry ditch with rock, not a river, a ditch, cut 6 feet down into the floor of a valley, dry 11 months a year, empty of fish since before anyone alive could remember. He hauled in rock, gravel and juniper logs and stacked them into low piles that leaked, 100 of them, strung along 3.5 miles of a creek called Camp Creek. His name is Scott Campbell. He helped build a national chain of pet hospitals and sold his share the same year he bought the ranch, a stretch of country between Burns and John Day, about 300 road miles southeast of Portland, ringed by the Malheur National Forest. The State Fisheries Office had questions about his structures. So did the water regulators. Neighbors watched a rich man haul rubble into a dry ditch and drew their own conclusions. Then a letter came from the state. It said he owed money for illegally altering a waterway because by then the ditch was a creek. It ran in August. It held trout, and a dry gully in eastern Oregon belongs to whoever owns the dirt, while a creek that runs year-round and holds fish is water of the state of Oregon, and moving material through it needs a permit. Campbell had never had one. He could not have had one. When he started, there had been nothing there to permit. He had built the thing that made his own work illegal. 6 years later, in the summer of 2015, a planned burn got loose in that country and took thousands of acres of sagebrush and dry grass. It came down the draw toward the ranch and reached the valley where all that rock had gone in, and it went out. The people who watched that happen are the same people who built the structures which is worth holding on to, but the fight that letter started did not end with the fine, start with the ditch, because nobody dug it. That valley had been engineered before by men who never meant to engineer anything. Beaver were removed from this country deliberately in the 1820s under a Hudson's Bay Company policy of stripping the interior bare, so American trappers would find nothing worth the walk. What went with them was a piece of plumbing. Take the dams out and the creek changes shape. A creek slowed every few hundred feet, spreads sideways, drops its sand and gravel, stays wide and shallow. A creek that nothing slows runs fast and fast, water digs. It cuts into its own bed. The banks grow taller. The flat ground that used to flood every spring ends up stranded 6 feet above the water. Scientists call that channel incised. A rancher calls it a ditch. Then came the cattle numbers of the 1880s eating the bank plants that held the dirt together, and a century of putting out every fire which let western juniper spread across millions of hectares. It had never ruled. Juniper drinks, and it drinks a lot. Too many cattle, too little fire, too many trees. By the year Campbell arrived, the Silvies Valley was getting the same rain it got in 1800 and losing all of it by July, which is the part most people have backwards about desert country. The problem was never how much water showed up. Campbell walked those creeks and reached a conclusion that took him straight into the permit office. Plenty of water arrived every spring. It just never stayed long enough to matter. Think about a gutter and a sponge. Rain that hits a gutter is gone in 10 minutes. The same rain hitting a sponge is still there tomorrow and comes back out slowly for as long as any is left. A valley floor with a high water table is a sponge. One with a trench cut through it is a gutter. Same sky, same rain, and by August, completely different amounts of water. So the Campbells started stacking rock, all of it off the property, each pile built a few inches proud of the valley floor, so high water rolls over the top instead of punching through the middle. The biggest hold more than 1,000 cubic yards. The average is nearer 200. The spacing rule is dull but exact. One structure for every foot of drop in the creek, which on steep ground means more than 100 in a mile. Campbell counted 54 miles of broken channel on his land. Nobody applied for a permit. Nobody knew one existed. Under Oregon law, moving more than 50 cubic yards of material through waters of this state needs a removal fill permit. and these inward draining creeks are state water. The Wildlife Agency had fish passage rules on top of that. None of it was foolish. Every one of those rules exists because somebody once wrecked a wetland and walked away clean. Written to catch damage, they caught repair instead because the law had no category for a man improving a waterway into existence. The state charged him a fine. The reporting at the time called it small and noted that he kept his dams. That should have ended the experiment. It didn't, because by then the rock was already working, and the reason it works is stranger than the fine. The thing that makes these structures work is the thing that makes them look broken. They leak. A concrete dam is a wall, water on one side, none on the other. These are closer to a coarse strainer. Water pushes through the gaps, slowed but not stopped. And while it is being slowed, it presses sideways and down into the gravel of the valley floor. People look at a beaver pond and see a tank of water. The tank is underneath it, soaked ground out of the sun and wind moving at walking speed. A pond might hold a few thousand gallons. The wet ground it feeds holds far more and gives it back all summer, long after the spring melt has left the county. Raise the water table in grass that died in June, stays green into September. Keep the grass green and the roots hold the bank. Hold the bank and the creek stops cutting. Now the objections, because everyone raises the same ones. Won't a still pond get hot and silt up and kill the fish? That was the prediction, and the opposite happened. Water sinking through gravel rather than sitting on the surface buffers temperature. And the silt does the work anyway. Sediment settling behind each structure is how a creek bed climbs back toward the land beside it. Won't a dam block fish moving upstream? Michael Pollock and colleagues tagged young fish on a Klamath tributary and moved them below the structures. 91% of the coho and 54% of the steelhead were back upstream within 3 weeks. A fish that once passed one of these can get past. If you hold water up here, are you taking it from the neighbor down there? An Oregon water right is legally owned property, so the question is fair. The Property and Environment Research Center describes more water leaving the ranch and arriving later in the season, though that rests on the rancher's own figures rather than an independent gauge. And why not just release beavers and skip the rock? One Oregon study found 78% of relocated animals left. A beaver needs a shallow creek with willow on the banks. Dropped into a bare trench, it has no food, no cover, and no way to build. The habitat comes first, which leaves the question the fine really turned on. Does it work? Silvies has a genuine weakness there, and the Forest Service says so plainly. The research note on this ranch by Rachel Davey, Susan Charnley, and Hannah Gosnell records that nearly every benefit is reported by the owners themselves. No baseline measurements, no control site. The hard evidence for the method comes from Bridge Creek, 100 miles northwest, where Nick Bowes and his colleagues ran it as a controlled experiment and published survival and production gains against an untreated watershed, a story worth its own telling, and one this channel has already told. What Silvies had instead was a price. Engineered stream repair is quoted by the structure and runs into 6 figures a mile. The Forest Service put Campbell's method under $20,000. That gap is why a rancher would try it without asking anyone first. What nobody had priced in was what the valley would do next. The Campbells built for grass and stock water. That was the entire business case. The valley had other plans. Redband trout showed up first in the Silvies River, and in Camp Creek and in Hay Creek, in reaches where the State Wildlife Agency holds no historical record of fish